Hello and welcome to Dateline New Haven. I'm Paul Bass, inviting you to look behind the headlines on the stories that make our community tick. Well, we have a hometown kid, now no longer kid made good in New Haven. Erick Russell is the state's treasurer, one of the highest statewide posts in Connecticut. He's finishing his first term, and he's running for a second. He's here to tell us how that's gone and what he's looking forward to do next. Erick Russell, thanks for coming back to Dateline New Haven.
Hey, Paul, it's great to be with you.
So why do you want another 4 years to be the state treasurer?
Yeah, so we have a lot more work to do. I'm really proud of the record that we've established over the last 4 years. And frankly, the perspective that I think I've brought to this office, as you know, growing up here in New Haven, working in my family's business, I think a really strong understanding of what working families are experiencing, particularly in this moment. And I know a lot of people would say, I don't know exactly how that ties into the treasurer's office, but at the end of the day, I'm the state's chief financial officer, right? And I think the decisions that we're making, the progress that we have made as a state, the work that we've done in really correcting many of the mistakes of the past and getting our pension in order, getting our state's finances in order, is what allows us to continue to make progress and invest in families in this state. And so there's a lot more work that I'm excited to get done and really to build on the progress that we've made over the last 4 years.
CFO, see, I never thought of it that way because as we talked before on air, you know, your main jobs are you're investing, was it $65 billion of pension money?
We're at about a little over $73 billion in
now $73 billion.
Point, yeah.
And so it's really growing because your website still says 62.
Yeah. Well, we reported on the end of the fiscal year, so we'll have some updated numbers when those final numbers come out.
So you invest $73 billion worth of government workers' pensions, state and municipal. That's a big, big part of your job. The part I really hadn't paid attention to right before getting air is that you also manage all of our debt, that you sell the bonds. And then we also have some stuff that's very important that people hear about, which is S-cheats, like unclaimed property that you get from the state. Can you get it back? And baby bonds, where you're getting people some money if they come from modest circumstances for the rest of their life.
Yeah, the way I would think about it is it's the elected role that's responsible for managing all the state's money. So to your point,
comptroller pays the bills and makes sure it's being spent right.
So it's kind of the check and balance. We manage all of the money, and then through the comptroller's office, it's kind of the check. So checks only come out from that office, and though we manage all of the money and bank accounts associated with that, and then the comptroller's office.
So it's general fund.
Yeah, we manage all of the money that is held by the state. Yeah,
including general fund. Okay.
So what ends up happening is the comptroller's office is kind of the chief auditor. They oversee the state's health plan, which is the largest health plan in the state, and then really serve as kind of a fiscal watchdog, right? To make sure that as they are looking over everything that's happening in the state from the financial perspective, they're issuing the reports around that and making sure that ultimately everything is adding up at the end of the day. So Sean and I work really closely together on everything kind of financial in the state.
But I'm sorry to be really, really ignorant, but if we pass a $40 billion 2-year budget, let's say, that's mostly tax revenue, right, and grants from the federal government. How does that figure in the treasurer?
So any money that is being held by the state is in my office. So we have the pension assets, which I mentioned are about $73 billion in assets. That's state employees, teachers, retirees, municipal employees, firefighters, cops. So it's managing their retirement security. We manage all the state's cash. So we have a short-term investment fund, which is all of the cash that we have on hand.
That would include tax receipts.
That's exactly.
Or and you try to get like short-term float on the money so that we have more money?
We invest that. We get very strong returns on that. We've been outperforming on the short-term investment fund. And that's, again, you know,
I never knew that about treasury.
Yeah, so we, on top of the pension fund, there's probably another $12 billion or so that we're managing on that front. That includes our rainy day fund. And then there's all the debt side of it. So that's how we issue bonds to help pay for schools and childcare facilities, transportation infrastructure in the state.
So with the rainy day fund, which we've maxed out, you're investing that so it can grow.
Exactly. And all that money and excess, you know, it's any money that we're holding in the general fund as well that we're earning returns on goes back into the general fund. So it contributes to the ability for us as a state to continue to make investments.
And you talk a lot about your upbringing in New Haven, working your family store. It would seem to me that just as crucial in your story is the work you did as a lawyer for a little over a decade before you became, right? Correct? Because you actually managed the money and sold bonds, right?
For sure. So, you know, that certainly was my qualification coming into this role, which I thought was really helpful. So as part of my role, I was a partner at a private firm in the public and private finance group. And I represented the treasurer's office, but also a number of municipalities in Connecticut.
You represent the state treasurer's office?
Correct. Wow. Municipalities, quasi-public agencies. So think about our airport authority, for example. And so there was this strong overlap between government and finance issuing debt, doing a lot of work of the office. I also represented private entities. We did pension restructurings on the municipal
But the
level.
actual debt, you would actually buy bonds on behalf of, like you'd be the kind of person you hire now at the Treasurer's.
Well, we were actually the
bond counsel.
We issued bonds, yeah. So we did a lot of that, but we also represented underwriters. So on the other side of those deals, people who are helping to sell those bonds out in the market. So really from every angle of those financial transactions, I had experience in coming into this role, which has been really effective and frankly has been really helpful in us being able to come in and hit the ground running. And I'm really proud of what we've been able to accomplish.
So let's talk about that in terms of what you have to do day to day that you hit the ground running. When you talk about $73 billion in pension money at invest, how is that doing? What kind of returns are we getting? We had, before you got in, we were ranking near the bottom of states in terms of what kind of returns we're getting. Everybody's doing better because stock market went up, but our relative ranking has risen, correct?
Yeah, and I think that's the important piece, right? We can talk about the market being up, and our job is to, as long-term investors, is that we're not just, we're trying to invest well for pensioners throughout these market cycles. It's not just when things are going well. And so we're trying to set up a fund that is going to last over time, right? We have a global diversified portfolio, meaning we're invested in many different asset classes and all over the world. And we set this up to really perform long term. We have a target return of 6.9%. And we've actually performed over the last 3 calendar years since coming in, just shy of 12.5%. And that puts us
And is that because of the record stock market?
So some of it is about the market being up, but we've also outperformed over 80% of other large public pension plans across the country.
Why does that happen? Why did our relative, because there's the Yale study that your opponent talked about, a lot of people talked about before you came in, that we were ranking poorly compared to other states in returns on our pension investments. What got our relative ranking up?
Yeah, it's a combination of things. We've made a lot of reforms coming in. One is about having a great team in place. And so we've done a lot of work to build out the investment team, to have the right talent in place to make investment decisions. We have a very strong investment advisory council, which is the body that we work closely with, that has fiduciary responsibility over how we go about investing, the parameters around how we can invest, but also our asset allocation, which drives the majority of your performance.
And asset allocation means when you buy certain kinds of
it's if you think about our whole portfolio, you think about that 73 billion, it's how much of that of each asset class we're invested in. So if you say, how much is in private equity, how much is in equities, how much is in private credit, that asset allocation is what drives a lot of your performance.
And that's what I want to ask you. Did we change the formula for that?
Correct. So we have a new asset allocation, which has been certainly a big driver of performance. We did a lot of work. So what we did was make sure we could strengthen that investment advisory council. So I actually drove legislation to make sure we can get the best talent on that body. And we have an incredible group of professional, experienced investment folks that are on that IAC now. We've done a lot of work to reduce fees, to kind of streamline the portfolio. There have been a lot of big structural changes that have driven this performance.
And how about the philosophy? Like, I guess Ellen Schuman's on there, right? Who had a lot of experience with institutes of higher education, right? Did they tell you we need to have less in private equity? We have to have more in electronic traded funds?
Well, it's a big process. So we're actually going through this process again. We always review what that asset allocation is. We're doing a full review of that this year. We work with outside consultants that drive some of that. We work with our investment advisory council and with our professional investment team internally to ultimately decide, right, like what do we think this is going to look like in the future, right? It's very easy to say right now,
AI is hot.
This asset class is not doing well. We shouldn't have it. But we're looking at this for 10 years down the road, not in the rearview mirror.
So there are 2 questions there, last 4 years and looking ahead. So it sounds like you're saying you got really good advice. You brought in some experience, you got good advice, and they figured out how best to invest the money. Can you tell me some specifics about something you did differently in that formula for investment?
Yeah, so what we did in asset allocation, we actually have been shifting more of our portfolio over to private markets. So we, if you look
as opposed to publicly traded stocks?
Correct. And so if you look at where we've been historically, and if you look at Yale's study, for example, a big reason of why we underperformed compared to many of our peers over that 10-year window of time was that many of those funds had way more exposure to private equity than we did.
Oh, private equity.
And so we were way behind the ball. We missed a really hot run in private equity, which ultimately impacted our performance. And there were many other things that we could certainly talk about.
And that's like the Yale investments, but then that stopped, right?
For sure. But again, the goal here is to have a set asset allocation that's looking forward, that you're not trying to time the market with, but it's that you're trying to meet your goal of 6.9% over long periods of time. And so That's been one thing. What we've benefited from, one is we've been putting a lot of extra money in, and we certainly have been performing well on the equity side.
Wait, extra money in?
We've made, so at the end of this year, since 2021, we'll have made close to $11.5 billion of additional contributions to the pension fund.
Oh, yeah, you're talking about the statewide decision.
Correct.
That
So,
we invested. You used all that extra money we got when we maxed out, when we had the guardrails.
when we've had money
and we
from the
maxed
volatility.
out. Yeah.
Exactly. And so those funds are going in, and we've been able to invest that. And if you think about it, right, that nearly 12.5% performance annualized, as you talk about this extra money, is really significant for pensions.
So does the fact that we invested more in pension have anything to do with why we got higher returns, or it just means it lowered our debt load?
No, it's not directly. It's certainly increased our funded
Which is a
ratio.
good thing.
Yes,
Yeah.
but one of the things is we benefited from the stock market because some of this extra money, that's where it's going to be held because it takes more time to put money into private markets. That being said, we're actually buying into private markets when a lot of other plans that had higher allocations to private equity, for example, are selling off. So we've been able to buy at discounted rates on the private equity side. We've been able to be really intentional about how we're deploying those resources, which I think is, again, if you say private equity's return profile is a little down right now, what we're thinking about is long term, and I think these are things that are going to really set us up for sustained.
And again,
performance
like I don't
in the
even
future.
know 1% of what you're saying about this stuff. What I read about in the journal is that people actually believe that everything from private credit to private equity and even emerging markets are no longer good long-term investments. They think that a lot of that was built up on making, like for instance, private equity, and they buy out these companies, they buy out the stuff they think they can squeeze a lot of money out of. Some they could turn around, some they could just sell for parts. And that they got the easier, the low-hanging fruit. And in fact, they bought a lot of companies that aren't going to be salvageable. So you're kind of are you going against the conventional wisdom that in fact private equity might be a bad, like in other words, you got it cheap. So you said we did well because everyone was getting out. We got it for a lower amount. So we actually got some pretty good returns and we doubled almost our goal. But is that a long-term strategy? Are people wrong that we should be going to more broad-based like ETFs?
What I would say is I don't think that that's conventional wisdom. I think your point is the view of some. I think this is where manager selection is really important because just like any other industry, right? If you have folks that are good at their jobs, if you have people that have been investing in a very disciplined way, that are staying on strategy, that are not chasing these incredibly high returns and trying to squeeze every dollar out of a company, you're going to start to see these managers, there's going to be a lot of separation in who's performing well.
So you're saying there's private equity and there's private equity.
Correct.
There's Alden Capital, which just destroys newspapers, and they're more responsible people who do solid investing.
And that's why our team does a lot of diligence around these managers. We work very closely with the IAC, reviewing every manager that we ultimately invest in, because that's ultimately what is going to drive performance.
And again, this is above my knowledge base. Are you in fact saying that you're making a bet on smart private equity investments at a time when even your Republican opponent is saying we got to get out of private equity because they've picked the low-hanging fruit and those returns are going to be low? Everyone from Yale to...
I don't know what he's basing us needing to get out of private equity on. If you look at any public pension plan across the country right now, they have investments in private assets because it's why we have a diversified portfolio. The stock market has been a great driver of performance in recent years, but the valuations and everything is incredibly high. And
are you worried there's going to be an AP collapse, a collapse of the AI boom that will then...
I think we certainly need to be mindful of, but this is why we have a diversified portfolio, is so that we're not dependent on any one asset class to drive all of our performance.
And is that, you feel the same way about private credit and emerging markets? Private credit has really been... that people are not recommending that as an investment.
But private credit has actually performed pretty well. I think just like with any other asset class, not all private equity is the same. And I think we've been really intentional about the type of opportunities that we're looking at and the security of those investments.
So you're saying we can invest smart rather than looking at broad categories. We could do well within each category and have a diversified portfolio.
Exactly.
And that's the same with emerging markets because those are the three areas he thought.
And if you look at emerging markets, for example, last year was actually outperformed U.S. equities, right? And so is one of the main drivers of strong performance in a lot of portfolios. So I think a lot of this is about being disciplined. We're not day traders. We're not stock pickers, right? Our goal is to make sure that we have a long-term set strategy to drive our intended goal over a long period of time. And frankly, we've been doing it, right? Again, to be in the top, we went from being one of the worst performing pension funds in the country to one of the top performing pension funds.
Where do we rank now?
So our performance for that last 3-year window had us in the 17%. So in the top 17% of performers.
And we were at the bottom, 20?
We think we were lower than that based on the study that came out. And again, it's this. We have to think about this long term. What I would say is, I think a lot of the reforms and changes that have been made are driving exactly what we are looking to do long term as a state. And I'm excited about continuing to build on that.
And I'm hearing you right that you think your biggest factor in what's worked well for you in the last 2 years is the quality of the people you have advising you?
Absolutely. Well, we have an internal investment team that we've built up with incredibly talented people who are so committed to this work and could frankly be off doing a lot of other things and making a lot more money, but care about the residents of the state. And, we've been able to build a strong culture and really a culture of excellence in the office. And I think that's what you're starting to see play out.
And final really dumb question on this.
Sure.
Because,
you got us in the weeds here, Paul.
There are certain analysts who say that when you talk all that attention you pay to which private equity, which kind of traded fund, what elements to pull out because you think AI won't do well, that in the end, broad-based funds that just track the stock market outperform even hedge funds sometimes. They said that recently hedge funds, which are to the wealthiest, most sophisticated investors, so they don't have to follow all the guidelines that they think the big risk, that they're actually giving you lower returns than just blind buy the stock market or buy a mutual fund, buy ETF. Is there any truth to that? That if like Erick and all his like really smart advisors just decided to go take a vacation and just say go to like a broad-based fund and we'll do fine.
Listen, I think it's always easy to look in the rear view and say that. I think having too much concentration in any one area pose a risk to your portfolio, especially as a long-term investor. But what I would also note is that when you think about where we are, and so from the stock side, for example, right, our equities portfolio, most of that is invested in indices. It's not, we are not trying to pick stocks to beat the stock market. Most of that is passively invested. Where we are taking picks and have more active investments will be in areas where things are a lot more uncertain. So you'll find more of that manager-led investment in the equities market in things like emerging markets where there's a lot more uncertainty.
So it kind of seems like you're saying take more diversification than your opponent is. So if your opponent's saying, let's pull out 50 or 75% of what we're doing in private equity, private credit, emerging markets, and just go on the broad-based indices. You're saying, in fact, we still majority do broad-based indices, but you think maintaining smart investments in private equity and private credit, emerging markets are, in fact, the way to be broad-based. Because any investment advisor from, again, my knowledge base, I think they tell you that even a conservative investing strategy includes some element, if you're long-term, in some risk-taking.
You have to have risk in order to meet your goal, right? Otherwise, we'd be invested in cash and we'd never meet our target return for our pensioners. I think the diversification that we have is important. And I think it's why my chief investment officer and my entire investment team, I think it's why our investment advisory council that's led by seasoned investment professionals, it's why the outside consultants and folks that we work with and every other public pension plan across the country has a diversified portfolio that also has exposure to these private markets. Because if you think about what we're trying to do long term, that diversification best meets our goals and to help hit our target. And so I feel good about what we're doing. I think if you look at past performance and kind of the improvements that needed to be made, I think we've done a lot of those things now to make sure that we're set up to continue to drive good success.
And just to put that for the every person why this matters, we got in the weeds, as you said. The two main reasons this matters is because it's tens of thousands of people whose retirements depend on this. Everyone who work for the state, teachers, municipal workers. And because pension funding was so mismanaged, lack of investment in the first place for so many decades, Democrat and Republican, that the average person in Connecticut has a lot more debt to pay, tens of thousands of dollars over their lifetime, because we're so highly indebted because of past mistakes, so that investing more in the pension funds to lower how much we owe and managing it better actually affects what everybody pays in taxes.
Yeah, this is big for taxpayers. It's big for the state. Yeah. It's what allows us to continue to invest in Connecticut, in people, in families. It frees up money as we're outperforming, as we're digging out of that unfunded liability. It's freeing up resources for us to put back into programs in the state so that people ultimately have a better quality of life in the state. So I think a lot of folks, it's a really complicated conversation, and again, no, we're in the weeds. At the end of the day, this is about making sure we have resources as a state to help families and working folks that are living here.
What about cryptocurrencies?
We are not invested. I'm not interested.
So you and your Republican agree. We're talking to Erick Russell, he's the Democrat. He's the treasurer, state treasurer in Connecticut, and he's running for a second term. Reed Man has the thumbs up for you, Erick. Daniel Hunt says Erick Russell is a great guy. Looking forward to seeing him at the back to school basketball tournament tomorrow. So you didn't tell me that's the other important part of the job. You have a jump shot, or?
Yeah, I used to. It's been a long time since I shot a basketball, so we'll have to see how that goes.
So another big part of your job is the debt side. Tell me a little bit about that, because it's the part that I and others don't pay as much attention to. So you actually, when we borrow to build a road, to build a school, we take on debt.
Yep.
And we sell bonds. How does that work, and what do you do, and how have you tried to do it well?
Yeah, so we issue debt on behalf of the state. So if you think about it, whether it's how we build a new school that's going to go up in your community, a new childcare facility, if it's fixing a highway or a bridge, we issue debt to ultimately fund that. And our office is responsible for that. And the big piece there is that, one, we've done a lot of work to improve our overall fiscal health, which what it does, think about it just like a credit score. We've received just last year 2 upgrades to our credit rating, which, just like for you, if you have a good credit score and you are borrowing money, you get a better interest rate. It's the same thing for us.
And the reason of that is that we had very high returns on income tax because of how much Fairfield County people in the finance industries are making. And we had a 2017 agreement, bipartisan agreement, that we weren't just going to take 1 year surpluses and put it in the general fund. We were going to pay down the pension, and we were going to max out the rainy day fund. Is that the reason? And then it pays off with lowering.
If you're talking about overall fiscal health, there's a lot of factors that go into it. What I would say is, again, we went 7 years without doing what we were supposed to do. We weren't paying into our pension fund, so we were essentially creating a massive amount of debt long term. We had really high fixed costs. And it wasn't until 2011 under Governor Malloy that we actually started making those required contributions to the pension fund, which led us to, in the right direction. And yes, the fiscal guardrails have been really critical, and particularly the volatility cap, which we used to create these budgets and then revenues didn't come in as we expected, and then we'd have a $2 billion hole in the budget. And so what we've been able to do is things that are coming in, revenue that's coming in above that volatility cap, we've been able to put into the pension fund and really pay down that long-term
and have a rainy day fund. So as
exactly.
You mentioned before we came in there, you go around the country, and we are in a better shape right now with cuts from the federal government because we have money that can cover that.
So, I think in 8 balanced budgets, right, all of these things have improved our overall credit rating, but then that allows us to invest in programs and in people, right? So as we're building new infrastructure, as we're building new schools, we're getting it at a lower cost to taxpayers, which is important. And so all of that issuance happens out of our office as well.
And then are the Republicans correct that a lot of the gains we made by paying into the pension fund are endangered because of collective bargaining agreements that are going to raise wages so much that in the long term, we're going to have much more pressure on the pension fund because of higher salaries lead to higher pensions?
So no, I don't agree with that. I mean, we've done a lot of work. If you look at our funded ratio, so 10 years ago or so, we were just over 30% funded. We'll see when we get our final numbers at the end of this year, but I think we'll be pushing 70% funded.
And that's considered, what is it, 70 to 80 is considered full?
It's different state to state. Some people use 80 or 85.
And why is that to the layman? Why would it not be 100?
I don't think any of this is to a layman, but I think some people do use 100. But essentially it's.
But that is the norm. 80 is considered a very
85,
well funded. Yeah. Why is 80% not 100% considered?
I think it's just at that point the fund. If you're just paying in regularly, you're going to be in a strong spot to continue to make payments out of it. So I don't know the exact science behind it. But I think the important piece with all of this, right, is like this work has been about getting the state on track and ready to make a lot more progress in the future. And I think we've, the guardrails have been really critical in that. I think the work that we've done around the pension fund to improve performance and really shore that up has been a big piece of it. And that's what's going to allow us,
So that's the answer about the collective bargaining, that people need raises, but we can also do better in the returns we get on the.
Well, the piece with collective bargaining is that if you look at, we have now on tier 4 for employees, right? If you look at earlier tiers that came with really stacked benefits for folks that they bargained for and frankly deserved, that wasn't the reason that our pensions were underfunded. We were underfunded because we didn't pay into it. So when the actuaries do our valuation at the end of this year and determine what our funded ratio is, it's going to be based on those benefits that are already
paying
baked
in every year.
So it doesn't mean that it's going to drop our funded ratio.
But it does mean you'll have to put more in.
Potentially, but we're also, again, as we've been digging out of this hole, we're freeing up a lot more resources. And the benefits are not the same, right? I came in as a tier 4 employee. I don't have a pension in the same way that somebody did 20 years ago. I'm paying essentially into a 401k. And so the demand, part of what I think the reason that we've needed to pay more for state employees is if you want to have good people in place, you need to compensate them, and the benefits aren't what they used to be for
and that's part of poverty
compensation.
prevention too, is to pay people enough.
For sure.
But I'm just wondering if kind of the message is, and it's not about you, is that in fact there's been a deterioration of benefits through privatization through 401k over years, so that even if we gave people good raises, they're not getting the health and pension benefits that our parents got.
Correct. Yeah.
That's pretty interesting. So baby bonds, a big thing that you got a lot of.
Yeah.
You ran on this when you were here 4 years ago. You said, if elected, I want to create baby bonds. I want when someone who's born in lower income circumstances, there's going to be some money set aside that they don't touch till they're 18 and not go to college, starting a business or buying a home. And you got something passed, $3,200 for every kid who's every baby that's covered by Medicaid. That's so. How's that going? You got that passed?
It's great. It's great. We're 3 years into the program. About 48,000 children have been born eligible for baby bonds. To put that in perspective, nearly half of the children born in Connecticut every year are born into poverty. And so I think it says it's about 45% correct. And so it says, I think it says something about the need and demand, right? So with this program, this $3,200 is dedicated to each child. We have a trust that we established that's cash funded for 12 years. So the program is paid for in full for 12 years. And we invest those funds alongside our pension assets. And so those funds grow over the life of that child, and then they can use it to help purchase a home, to start or invest in a Connecticut business, to help pay for post-secondary education or job training, or they can roll it into a retirement savings
Is this
account.
like the Trump bonds or no?
It's different. I do think that the Trump accounts were modeled off of a baby bond program in some way, but we can get into more detail on this. I actually think that the way that their accounts are structured, it's actually going to exacerbate the problem of wealth inequality.
What's the reason?
It's that you're giving everyone $1,000, so it's not a progressive program. Ours are going to folks who are most in need. Theirs are going to everyone. And then the tax structure that's set up in Trump accounts is that families that have resources can put more money into these Trump accounts, and it's essentially a shelter to be able to pass wealth down. Whereas the goal here is to kind of level the playing field. And so what you're going to end up having is individuals that don't have knowledge or that don't know to open those accounts aren't going to even get the $1,000 benefit. Whereas baby bonds, folks are automatically eligible if their birth is covered by Husky. They don't have to do anything. But you're saying that if someone's wealthy, they can then buy into this program and earn extra benefits and interest for their kids. They're going to continue to put more money in.
That's
folks
so
with fewer resources
there's two things I thought of when you said that. So one is the point you're bringing up, which is its own point.
Yeah.
That this is structured out to disproportionately help wealthy people. Then there's the second point that was an argument that came out of the Great Society, which is Social Security versus welfare, which is whether programs, and this is a really intellectual question that's very interesting to me, and Stanley Greenberg has a strong point on it. Other people say that if a program's going to succeed, everyone's got to be covered, like Social Security, then everyone's bought into it. And people say that was sort of one of the lessons about the backlash against welfare, but there's no backlash against Social Security. But other people would argue, and I think I might be hearing here, is that then everything just costs too much, and that sometimes it's okay if there's been wealth inequality and some people get born into circumstances that give them fewer opportunities, to give them a few opportunities that everybody else doesn't get. It's kind of a political argument, right? That will it be popular if only half the population get, but half's a lot.
Well, and I would say, I think the ultimate solution to this problem, and wealth inequality is something that continues to grow all across the country. This is not a Connecticut unique problem. I think this needs to really be resolved or addressed on the federal level. And I think the reality is, if you think about wealth inequality and many of the challenges that have been created in this country, they've also happened through policy, right? There's been policy that has led to a lot of this division, and I think that it's totally reasonable that we should be looking at innovative policy.
But how about that question of we can't have every program be for everybody because we never afford it. But the argument of people like Stanley Greenberg was that if too much of it just helps a group and then gets demonized, often racist in a racist way by a backlash political force, that you can temper that by having everyone brought in, maybe do less of it, but have everybody in.
Well, and again, this was proposed on the federal level to have everyone get a baby bond, but to be on a more progressive basis, right? So that folks with fewer resources are getting more money than those without it. At the end of the day, right, I think that what we're looking to do here in Connecticut, this is about investing in people creating a stronger economy in the future where you have more people participating, more people that are have an opportunity to really lift themselves up in a meaningful way. And frankly, we were able to get broad-based buy-in from both sides of the aisle, from independents, from local elected officials who understood that these resources were going to be reinvested back in their communities, that this was investing in the future workforce here in Connecticut. We had the business community who knew that this was a way to keep young people in the state. And so I think when folks see the problem, there is broad-based support to actually look at ways to fix it. The one place
you didn't get support, the one person who tried to stop it, was Governor Lamont. And there were emails released to the Connecticut Mirror where they really revealed that his team had some assumptions about the poor, saying that they're poor because some of the assumptions that someone would have from Greenwich who inherited a lot of money, that people are poor because they deserve to be poor, and this is just going to establish like sort of bad habits and not have a meritocracy. I mean, you kind of had to overcome that. What was it like for you after all that? You got elected and your own governor gets revealed to be the one force philosophically opposed to this kind of concept.
Yeah, I will say this. Coming in, I was very direct with the governor about my support of the program, and I just asked that he would keep an open mind and that we'd work together on it. And to his credit, he did. We over the course of months through the legislative session, worked together. I give a lot of credit to the Black and Puerto Rican Caucus and so many members of the legislature that were incredibly supportive. But I know the governor also had an issue with how the program was being funded. We were initially going to borrow to pay for it. And so I worked closely with him. We came up with many different ways of thinking about how to fund the program, and ultimately landed in a spot where he was able to get on board.
And how do we fund it?
So we actually cash funded it. We were able to free up a reserve fund that we had in the state that had about $398 million. And by doing it this way, we actually saved hundreds of millions of dollars. We were going to borrow $600 million over 12 years. So we'd have that $600 million, but also be paying to borrow.
What was the reserve fund for?
It was actually a backstop for bondholders for when we restructured our teachers' retirement fund. So it was cash that had been put in from the state.
And we aren't going to need it anymore?
And so we were able to free that up. It was money that was going to be sitting in a reserve for years, for about a decade. And we were able to free that up. We actually got a surety to be a backstop for those bondholders. I know we're in the weeds again here.
No, but that is important. So what happens in 10 years for those?
So then, but that money was just going to be released back to the state. And so we were able to use this money. We're actively investing that. So we've been able to get that same return as our pension fund over this period of time. By having that backstop,
it means if there's some kind of disaster,
exactly.
It can be covered.
So we were able to fund the program in a much more affordable way, but also to get this launched without impacting the general fund.
So when I was watching that from afar, when you had this going, I had two thoughts. First of all, here's Erick, who's a young politician who is running for a position that nobody really understands what they do, and the most important things you do are impossible to explain. And yet you want your job to stand for a certain set of values, and you want your career to be meaningful, and you want to tell people why it matters. And it seemed to me that when you ran, baby bombs was an issue where you could talk about work you do that really immediately not only makes a difference in people's lives, but that it represents a certain set of values about the issues you want our society to address. And so the two thoughts I had when I saw what happened with Lamont was, A, those memos in the Mirror were pretty incredible. Like, I got calls from people just pointing out to me, my name was on those memos, but I never thought those things or said those things. But on the other hand, it's sort of what Lamont's greatest strength has been, which he insisted that we not pay for it in a way that's going to get us in a new fiscal hole. What was going through your mind when all of a sudden the state treasurer, a kind of quiet position to some extent, was at the center of this really important issue that Black Hispanic Caucus was involved in, the governor was involved in, exposés. What was it like for you when that came to a crunch, and how did you psychologically get to a place saying, I'm going to solve the problem rather than argue about what was in those memos?
Because that's what I got elected to do, right? I'm not going to look in the rearview mirror about things that happened before I was here. I'm not going to look in the rearview mirror about, fiscal mismanagement in the state 20 years ago when I was graduating from high school. Like, that's ultimately not effective. What I am focused on is coming into this role and thinking about people who grew up with experiences like I did, right? Growing up on Congress Avenue, who, regardless of what you think of challenges that folks in the city and in the state are facing, the reality is there are a lot of people that don't feel like the existing system is working for them, right? And so my goal here is I wanted to come in and make sure we were improving pension fund performance, getting the state on track from a fiscal perspective, understanding that that's what allows us to also invest in people. And I think we've come up with some really innovative ways to do that, baby bonds being one example of it. The Early Childhood Education Endowment is another one that's going to ultimately help families.
That comes to
in the
your
state.
office too?
So we administer and oversee that endowment. And innovative things like the Safe Harbor Fund, whatever it is, the point is, like, how are we leveraging an office that, yes, people may not understand the work that we do or how it impacts them, but I want to make sure that I'm bringing my lived experience and perspective to this role to make sure that it's
And you made a
benefiting
choice of
more
how to
people.
deal with the crisis moment. Like some people in politics would look at those memos, which are basically saying people born into advantage are saying the other people who aren't deserve where they are, and this isn't a good idea. You had to ignore. Some politicians would seize on that to put the pressure for a settlement from the other side by exposing this outlook that a lot of people would think is outrageous. You instead focused on the more substantive concern the governor had, how to make it work, and just come to a way where he could make it work.
Yeah, and I think, we had a lot of conversations around baby bonds and what they meant and the impact that they could have on people, and that's part of what
He kind of said, look, if you really want to do this stupid idea, you can do it, but you better pay for it.
And I don't think that's exactly where he was. No, and I think the governor understands the importance of a program like baby bonds. I think the challenge, which is always the case in government, is when you have limited resources, it's saying, well, these funds could also be used for something else that would have a more immediate
You're going to have
impact.
and it was a good challenge you put to you. You're going to cut this from public universities.
And it's exactly why I think you go through this process, right? But and why it's important to have different voices and perspectives. But I give the folks involved a lot of credit. It is hard in government when people are mostly making decisions about one budget cycle at a time or one election cycle at a time. With a program like Connecticut Baby Bonds, we made a historic investment. I'm not going to be in office 18 years down the road when these kids get access to this capital. But I think everyone involved understood that it is important for us to think longer term than just what's in front of us, even if people aren't getting a short-term political benefit.
So you're not going to be in office in 18 years?
I doubt that. But
this office or any office?
I never thought I would be running for office at all, so I guess I shouldn't say anything.
Erick Westall, State Judge, just giving you a hard time. So the Safe Harbor Fund, let's talk about that.
Yep.
So there's another case where you were able to take your position and take a stand and take action based on an outlook on the world about pressing current issues. So other states were banning abortion.
Yep.
And Roe versus Wade was overturned. And they were banning gender-affirming care for minors.
Gender-affirming care, period, in a lot of places, but yeah.
So you set up a safe harbor fund that would pay the cost of people traveling here to get that.
So what this
why
is...
did why did you do that? What did that take to make work?
Yeah, so it was a concept that I developed in 2022 when I was running, and it was right after Roe v. Wade was overturned. And the main goal here is understanding particularly who is going to be most impacted by these laws, right? Are going to be individuals with fewer resources. It was going to be women of color. It was going to be members of the LGBTQ community. Frankly, somebody who makes $200,000 a year, if they need to have access to an abortion, they're going to be able to get on a flight and go where they need to go and get the care they need. For individuals that don't have that opportunity, I thought it was important that we establish a fund. These are all private dollars, so this is not state money that went into this, but it is going to help those individuals not pay for their care, but to help them with travel expenses, with lodging, childcare, for example, if that's necessary, for them to go get the safe, compassionate care that they need. And we're actually working with other states. The whole idea here is that you would have a series of states that have these resources to help backfill while the federal government has ultimately taken this position and while states are restricting people's access to care. So I think at a fundamental level, this is about saying we obviously have made this a priority in Connecticut, that we believe in people's access to safe and quality healthcare, and that this is a way to leverage the office and some private resources to assist folks whose access to that care has been restricted.
So how's that worked? How many people have made use of it?
So we just launched it. We actually have 2 private donors that came in with the initial funds for the Safe Harbor Fund.
This isn't state money.
It's not. And so we have the application process just recently opened. And what will happen is providers will apply for grants through the fund, and those funds will go to providers. We don't even administer it in that way directly. That way, if an individual is calling from Texas, needs access to care, they will be connected with the provider. That provider can help use these resources.
Are you going to send? So you send the provider, but you're going to reimburse the provider.
Correct. Or they'll get a grant exactly to help cover these types of expenses for patients.
So which expenses does it cover? The medical expenses or the travel?
So they're not cover. It's not covering the actual care itself. It's covering travel, lodging, potentially childcare, things like that.
And is this a part of it because you're going to anticipate legal challenges from the red states or from the Trump administration? I don't know if it's interstate commerce or if it's like abetting a crime, that if it's a crime to have an abortion in Texas, does Erick Russell become abetting a crime?
You're seeing this. You saw some of these cases early on. I don't think that resources helping someone travel to our state interferes with any laws in another state. They have every right under this Supreme Court decision that was unprecedented and that I totally disagree with in terms of restricting access to care, but that doesn't apply to us being able to provide care in our own state.
So one thing I hadn't had kept in my memory until I looked at your website the other day, speaking of LGBT issues, that you were the first out Black LGBT person in American history to win an election for statewide office. I pause because that's a lot of concepts at once.
Yeah.
You're the first publicly identified LGBT person who's Black ever to win a statewide election in America.
Yeah.
That's a big claim. So you said as a result of that, you see being in the position as being a mentor to other Black LGBT people who are out to be able to participate.
Well, I think mentoring generally has been important to me always because so much of my journey has been because I've had incredible mentors that really poured into me and provided me a lot of opportunity. And so it's always been important to me, whether it was when I was practicing law or when I was, even in college and trying to lift other people up. I think about my, own upbringing here. There's no shortage of talent in communities like the one I grew up in. There are shortages of opportunity. And I think so much of that is having exposure to the world that's out there, to different career paths, having advice about how to navigate many of these systems that a lot of folks are doing for the first time. And frankly, being able to see yourself reflected in a lot of these.
So that last part you do is just by being there.
Yeah.
And what about being a mentor? What have you actively done that play that kind of mentor role?
Yeah, I mean, it's through my law firm, I had many mentors in the legal field. Particularly, there's organizations like the Crawford Black Bar Association, for example. We started the LGBTQ Bar Association when I was at my firm. So again, being able to pour into particularly young people, and then right now through other elected officials. And, even we have a really strong internship program in our office, which was really important to me to make sure that we have young people coming into the office that are exposed to different things, that have these opportunities to start to get involved. And so I think all of us need to be doing more of that. We need to be creating these opportunities, finding ways to pull young people in. And
why did it take so long in America to elect an out Black LGBT person? What is it about the specific combination of race and sexual orientation what does that add up to in a combination?
I don't know. I mean, in many ways, when I was first kind of informed about it, it was a surprise to me. And I think what comes with that is a lot of responsibility to make sure you don't screw it up, right? But also,
what about American society? Why is that?
I mean, I think we all know the challenges around racism and homophobia and all of the kind of discrimination that takes place across the country. I think me being elected says a lot about Connecticut, though, right?
Well, you know what's so interesting about what it says to me? So two things can often be true at once. So we have that backlash in America right now, both on race and on sexual orientation, a real backlash of removing new protections, removing opportunity, discrimination. But there's also kind of like, in other ways, a grassroots acceptance that's nothing like I saw in most of my lifetime. Yep. So when you ran for your first term, within LGBTQ circles, there was awareness. Oh, okay, that's kind of cool.
Yeah.
But I heard nothing. I didn't remember seeing any kind of backlash, which would have been huge 10 years ago, 20 years ago. Am I right, or what did I miss?
I think
did you have to? I didn't see in my radar, which is a limited radar. I saw no backlash when you ran last time.
Yeah, I think this was my point around it saying a lot about Connecticut. I think folks focused and ultimately elected me because they thought I was the most qualified and best person for the job, which I think is a really bright spot.
But I didn't hear you contending with smears. Now, am I wrong?
No, not in Connecticut.
I mean,
there was a lot of the national noise, right? And there was a lot more attention there. And I think you see that in other races across the country. And frankly, it's in part why I was surprised by it, right? Because we've made all of this progress that has moved really quickly. But I also think there's this reason why you need to keep showing up and being authentic, and because I think those are the things that actually help move the needle. And I felt comfortable doing this, and feel like we didn't get a lot of that backlash because of so many of the people who blazed trails in Connecticut before me, right? So folks that I was fortunate to have mentoring me, which frankly made me feel comfortable stepping up and running.
I'm trying to understand these two opposite trends in American politics, and that's not state church anymore. So the most single effective ad in the last presidential election was an anti-trans ad.
Yep.
And running against trans seems to be the Republicans are grasping on to get people not to think about the Epstein files or about the war in Iran. There seems to be some receptivity to that. At the same time, when you even see polls of young evangelical Christians, there's an acceptance because they met people who are more out than they used to be who are LGBT.
Yep.
Is it that trans has become the new flashpoint, or that just two opposite things can happen at one time? Like what's happening in America now in politics, where at the same time you can have the first out black LGBT person and it really wasn't an issue to get you elected. At the same time that Democrats are losing power all over the country because of a backlash against LGBT and race.
Yeah, I think has also been Republicans not wanting to talk about real issues.
But why do they succeed in doing that?
Because they're trying to create a common enemy. And I think a whole idea of making communities and exploiting people as the scary new thing, for a lot of people that don't understand it and haven't been around folks who are gay or trans, it's hard for them to wrap their head around. And so they're latching onto these things. And I think we're going to see a big swing back the other way this election cycle, because at the end of the day, working people here in Connecticut and all across the country have seen that these policies rolling out of the federal administration, cuts to Medicaid, cuts to food assistance programs, housing assistance programs, while cutting taxes for the wealthiest people in this country and large corporations isn't working for them. The economy has not improved for them. Their life is not better than it was 2 years ago. And that all of the distraction and noise that has been put out there, people are realizing is not impacting them in a positive way.
So you think if they go against Tellerico by saying he's a vegan or he's secretly maybe kind of gay or something isn't going to work this time, or he likes trans people?
They're going to do all of it. And I think
but you're saying it's not going to land this time.
I don't think so. And I mean, there are going to be some people that continue to, jump on that wagon. I think at the end of the day, what we're trying to do here in Connecticut, and I think what we're seeing from a lot of people across the country, is focus on issues and solutions that are important to them and not be distracted by the noise or the, adherence to these policies that frankly haven't worked for a lot of people. And so we're going to continue to do our part here in Connecticut, with that being the focus. And I'm proud of what we're.
So Erick Russell, seems like you're running for election from a position of optimism, that you believe we can do better in tackling old fiscal problems, that we can earn more in our pensions, we can use our investments in a way that help the next generation and tackle issues like income inequality, that we can, in the process, in America in 2026, move forward against bigotry and hate. It seems like, is that an accurate encapsulation?
I think I'm an optimistic person. I'm also
You're also 37,
and I'm willing to put in the work. And I'm willing to put in the work to continue to do it. So it's not blind optimism, but I think we have better days ahead than behind us. So
that's a great thing to hear.
Yeah.
All right. And,
good.
We got Harry says you're too optimistic.
Yeah.
I don't think that's possible.
Yeah.
Erick Russell, thanks so much for making time to come on.
Great to be with you, Paul.
And thanks to Harry Jones behind the controls. We're going to take it out with the Afro-Semitic Experience performing I Wish I Knew How It Would Feel to Be Free from the group CD, A Plea for Peace. This is Paul Bass, inviting you to fly free with us all day and all night long at WNHH, New Haven's home for community radio.